Big Shaq's system crashed in front of the world, millions watching, seconds from disaster. Then from the back of the room, a janitor's daughter stepped forward. No badge, no title, just quiet confidence. What she revealed didn't just save the day, it exposed a truth buried deep beneath the code. And by the end, everyone knew the real power had never been behind the desk. Before we deep dive into this interesting story, subscribe to our channel, and tell us where are you watching from. Share in the comments below. Morning sunlight pours through the tall windows of the Johnson O'Neill Community Tech Center, illuminating the sleek rows of workstations, servers humming softly in precise cadence. At the center of this carefully constructed ecosystem stands Shaquille Big Shaq O'Neal, his towering frame easy to spot among colleagues and community members. He moves slowly and deliberately, greeting everyone he meets. A single nod, a warm smile, or a gentle handshake carries the weight of his sincerity. He has always believed that presence matters more than words, and every interaction, no matter how brief, reinforces the trust people place in him. The building was once an abandoned warehouse. Now it's a beacon of hope, in an underserved district, refurbished through Shaq's tenacity and vision. The walls display vibrant murals painted by local children, testaments to their potential. A neon sign in the lobby reads, "Empower through code, strengthen through community." It's more than a slogan, it's a mission statement. Shaq takes pride in the transformation that rippled outward from this building. He remembers how as a couple of computer screens flicked to life, and as first families came through the doors for job training workshops and scholarship tutoring, the center's purpose crystallized. His dream was simple yet profound: democratize opportunity through technology. Staffers exchange pleasantries, the kind that settle the soul before the daily bustle, and Shaq reciprocates, never rushing anyone. He pauses at each desk, checking in, asking how the previous day's mentoring session went, how the kids responded to the coding boot camp. He remembers names too many for one mind. He'll ask someone about their sister's graduation, or how their project presentation went, and they beam, pleasantly surprised that he cares. It's in these small human moments that Shaq stakes his claim as more than a symbol. He is their mentor, his empathy unbounded by his celebrity. As he walks deeper into the center, he glances at the massive digital dashboard mounted above the main workstation area. It tracks metrics, server uptime, program enrollment, success rates, even the percentage of beneficiaries who transition to full-time employment. Today it reads 99.98% uptime. Another day, another success milestone. He allows himself a moment of pride. This is the embodiment of his lifelong commitment, using every resource at his disposal, time, money, influence, to lift others where he once stood. And yet, beneath his solidity, there's a subtle friction. He senses it not in himself, but in the system. The servers hum, sure, but sometimes he notices a stutter, a hesitation, a slight lag springing into existence for a fraction of a second, before disappearing. He brushes it aside. After all, minor hiccups are par for the course in a system nearly as complex as the lives it supports. But those minor hiccups gnaw at him. In the moments when he thinks no one is watching, his chest tightens just a little. He was not built to stand idle in the face of instability. The staff's morning meeting gathers everyone in the bright conference room. The whiteboard lists the day's priorities. Finalize the new scholarship application form. Schedule the Board of Trustees visit next week. Confirm the volunteer outreach event at the youth center. The tone is confident, steady. Everyone believes things are proceeding as usual. But Shaq watches the faces, dedicated, hopeful. They need this to work. They trust the system. They don't know yet that something might go sideways. He pens a note on his tablet, reminding himself to double-check the backup servers later. It feels like an afterthought, not yet urgent, but he keeps returning to the thought. He glances at his watch, just past 8. By 9 o'clock, dozens of people will stream through the doors. Lunch-ready teens, stressed parents, enthusiastic volunteers, and the occasional dignitary looking to tour the center and study Shaq's model. He breathes in, steadying himself. This morning, like every morning, is the lifeblood of his vision. He ducks into his office, a modest room for someone of his stature. The walls hold snapshots, Shaq standing among laughing schoolchildren, another of him tearing it up on the golf course with parents he mentored, a candid image of the center's ribbon-cutting ceremony. He runs a hand along the desktop where a high-performance laptop and a paperweight shaped like a basketball sit side by side. An unlikely pairing but entirely fitting. In the mirror leaning against the wall, Shaq catches his reflection, stubble, calm eyes, and the invisible lines of responsibility etched across his brow. He straightens his posture and presses his palm to his chest. It's symbolic to remind himself that underneath this external world of servers and programs lies a human heart, steady, compassionate, unwavering. He logs into the system diagnostics dashboard. The interface pops up quickly, green indicators almost everywhere. A quick scan of the logs shows everything operating normally, but he knows better than to trust appearances alone. Systems rarely fail without warning. Something's off. He sends a quiet message to the lead IT engineer, June, asking her to place the systems in maintenance mode for 30 minutes at noon. No big deal, he rationalizes. It's just a precaution. But collect the deepest intel, he thinks, risking nothing. Before he leaves his office, he takes a moment to recall why every server, every volunteer, every bit of code built and deployed here matters so profoundly. He remembers the faces of those who arrived hungry for opportunity. The single mother working 2 jobs, learning to code in the evenings. The teenager whose startup idea launched from here. The refugee family enrolling in job readiness workshops. In every success he sees part of himself. Someone once underestimated. Someone who overcame. These aren't just beneficiaries. They're living proof that good investments, financial, emotional, communal, are never wasted. He makes his way back to the main floor just as the first visitors arrive. A steady flow of hopeful faces moves in. Some tentative, some eager, all in search of change. Shaq greets them one by one, connecting names to stories. He stops at the server rack near the entrance, where June is already standing, a cup of coffee in hand, looking worried. They exchange a knowing glance. She nods toward the rack. The fans are spinning swiftly, too swiftly. He frowns. That's not typical. He puts a large hand on her shoulder. June, he says softly. Thank you. Keep an eye on it. She nods, reassurance flickering in her eyes because he asked. She leaves in confidence. Shaq turns his gaze outward, scanning the room. Bright eyes scanning glowing screens. Hushed conversations of purpose and potential. Children coding for the first time. A single ripple, an entire pond of hope. For a moment, everything feels perfectly balanced. And yet, against the hum of hard drives and hope, there's that subtle undercurrent, something impending. As he makes his way to the front foyer to welcome a volunteer group from the local high school, Shaq's heart thumps just a little faster. He steels himself. Whatever comes next, he'll rise to meet it, not as a celebrity, but as a steward. This is the calm, but he suspects the glitch is already whispering in those servers, waiting for the right moment to strike. And Shaq, for all his size and fame, knows that if the glitch hits, it won't just crash a system. It could collapse everything built on trust. Everything grounded in integrity. Everything anchored in human connection. But he won't let it, not while he stands. Not while he's Big Shaq. The sun had barely climbed to its midday peak when the hum inside the Johnson O'Neill Community Tech Center shifted. It wasn't audible at first. Nothing that would alarm a passerby. But to the trained ear, to someone like Shaquille O'Neal, who understood how the flow of people and purpose harmonized with machinery and systems, the change was undeniable. The usual rhythm of keyboard clacks and casual laughter faded. In its place, a growing silence that curled in the corners of the compound, creeping like a cold draft under a sealed door. Shaq was walking through the mentorship wing, pausing at a workstation where one of the youth trainees was working on a resume template. The young man looked up, eyebrows furrowed. My profile just disappeared. Shaq leaned in, curious, not alarmed. He tapped the keyboard lightly, but the system screen was frozen. Spinning icon. No response. He moved to the next station. Same thing. Then another, still unresponsive. Within minutes, 3 interns had approached staff members, complaining of missing assignments, login errors, and vanishing files. It escalated rapidly. By the time he reached the main operations board, June, the lead IT engineer, was already frowning at the diagnostic screen. Something's wrong, she said low. Urgent. Not a power failure. It's deep. The dashboard read 0. Everything. Every statistic. Every tracked parameter, every resource pipeline had flatlined. Shaq's heartbeat surged, but his face remained stoic. Check the backup servers. I did, June replied, her voice tighter than before. They're blank. Like someone erased them. Shaq's jaw tensed. The air grew heavy. It wasn't just a glitch. It was a full-scale system failure. And the effects were immediate. Downstairs in the community support office, the printer stopped mid-page. Clients waiting on emergency food vouchers stared at black screens. Staff phones buzzed incessantly with confused messages from those who relied on auto deposits, housing aid, tuition assistance, medical reimbursements. Everything was routed through the central system, and now, it was all gone. The energy shifted. Conversations grew louder, more frantic. A woman clutched her phone to her ear, trying to explain to a city partner that the funding ledger wasn't lost, just inaccessible. Two caseworkers argued over who had manually recorded the latest scholarship approvals. A cluster of students hovered near the exit, uncertain if their applications had been submitted at all. Shaq stood still in the center of the control room, towering but unnervingly quiet. He was processing. All these years, he had emphasized digital access, streamlined processes, intelligent infrastructure. His entire mission to help the underserved through efficient, scalable tech now sat on a blank screen. His heartbeat thudded like a slow drum behind his ribs. He turned to June. "Tell me we have some kind of local snapshot." June hesitated. "I'm checking the archived partitions, but it looks like even the auto backups were disabled." "Not by accident." Her words landed like cold steel. "Not by accident." Outside the office glass, the commotion swelled. No one screamed. No one ran, but the tension was everywhere. Flashes of anxiety, disbelief, anger. The entire building thrived on the promise of stability. With the system gone, the promise faltered. Shaq walked out onto the main floor, passing between rows of desks and huddled staff. He stopped by the community help desk, where a single mother named Rochelle was shaking her head in disbelief. "They said my rent payment was canceled, that the file doesn't even exist. This can't be right." He knelt slightly to meet her eye, his voice steady. "We're going to fix this. You have my word." But even as he reassured her, doubt crept up his spine. Because he didn't know how he'd fix this. The inspection from the National Charity Board was just days away. Without system logs, recipient data, or financial traceability, the foundation's credibility would unravel fast. Donations would dry up. Grant renewals would be denied. The board didn't care about good intentions. They needed data. And Shaq had nothing but blank screens. He returned to his office and shut the door, his first moment alone since the collapse. He sat heavily in his chair, elbows on the desk, hands laced behind his head. The silence screamed. He was supposed to be the anchor, the calm during chaos. But right now he felt the floor beneath him shift. He stared at the family photo on his shelf. His mother Lucille and daughter Mara, beaming beside him at the launch of the tech wing. This place wasn't just wires and programs. It was his heart stretched across silicon and circuits. And now someone, or something, had snatched that heart offline. June's voice crackled through the intercom. "Shaq, I found something." He straightened immediately. "There's a line of code in the root directory. It's not from our team. Encrypted, deeply buried. Like it's meant to blend in. Sabotage." Shaq's thoughts jumped to the board. He'd sensed tension in the last few meetings. Some members had grown frustrated with his hands-on, no-glitz approach. They wanted expansion, franchising, visibility. He wanted impact. Less PR, more results. Could they be behind this? Or was it something else? Someone from the outside. He called a private meeting with June and two of his most trusted program leads. No long speeches. Just quiet, tense deliberation. They needed to isolate the malicious code. Map the damage. Reconstruct lost profiles manually if needed. Prioritize families who depended on daily assistance. It was triage, technological, procedural, emotional. "I want transparency," Shaq said. "No cover-ups. If we made a mistake, we own it. If someone tried to break us, we expose it." June nodded. "It'll take time, but we'll find the source." Hours passed like minutes. Shaq stayed late, pacing between departments. Each staffer worked feverishly, piecing together whatever scraps they could find. There were no fights, just flashes of frustration, voices raised, then quickly hushed, stress etched into every movement. Shaq fielded questions he couldn't yet answer. Is our data safe? Can we still submit the funding request? What if the board pulls out? He kept his tone calm, but every answer was a thread he clung to, spinning reassurance from uncertainty. Inside, the fear was real. This wasn't just a system crash. It was an existential threat to the foundation. And worse, someone had done it on purpose. By nightfall, the center dimmed. The compound, which normally hummed with gentle energy into the evening, now felt colder, empty. Only a few lights flickered in key areas. Shaq stood in the hallway, staring at the glowing error prompt still hovering over the main dashboard. System files not found. He closed his eyes and exhaled, thinking about every promise he'd made to this community. About every child who had told him, "I want to be like you." Not for the fame, not for the basketball, but because he made them believe they mattered. He wouldn't let this destroy that. He couldn't. Just before heading to his car, he passed the janitor's corridor. Elwood was mopping slowly, humming to himself. His daughter Nova was curled up on the waiting bench with a school laptop open, eyes flicking across the screen. Shaq paused. She looked up, sharp and aware. "You all right, Mr. O'Neill?" He hesitated, then nodded. "Just a long day." Nova tilted her head. "You know, sometimes when code vanishes, it's not deleted. It's buried." Shaq offered a faint smile, grateful for the simple observation. "You might be onto something." As he stepped outside into the cool night air, the words stuck with him. Not deleted, buried. And just like that, the fear shifted slightly, not gone, but tempered. Because if something was buried, maybe it could be unearthed. And maybe the person to do that wasn't in the boardroom or the control center, but somewhere far more unexpected. Shaq walked to his car with heavy steps, the building behind him silent but still standing. And though the system had died, he wasn't about to bury the dream just yet. The halls of the Johnson O'Neill Center were never quiet for long, but the silence that settled in the days after the crash was of a different breed. It wasn't peace, it was avoidance. Conversations still happened, but now they ended abruptly when someone entered the room. Laughter thinned out. Familiar greetings were exchanged with less warmth. People whispered, not because they wanted to conspire, but because they feared what saying too much might reveal. Shaq walked the corridors slowly, deliberately. He was used to being the largest presence in the room, but now his size felt like a burden, drawing attention, making people shrink rather than stand taller. He greeted everyone, as he always did, but something had shifted. Averted eye, awkward smiles. Discomfort layered the walls like a film that no amount of cleaning could scrub away. The initial shock of the system failure had passed, but the aftermath had given rise to something worse: suspicion. Staff members began speculating in hushed corners. Some claimed it had to be an outside breach. Others whispered about sabotage from within. June was certain the code was foreign, but encrypted in such a way that only someone with inside access could have embedded it so deeply. That pointed fingers inward, and once that door opened, it didn't close. Shaq convened his core leadership team for a closed-door meeting, expecting strategy, collaboration. Instead, he found himself navigating tension that had clearly been simmering long before the code failed. Malik, head of community engagement, suggested almost too forcefully that IT had been given too much unchecked control. Chelsea from the finance team subtly questioned whether data had been over-centralized under June's protocols. June, defensive but composed, countered with audit logs that hadn't yet been tampered with. Each word from her was measured, clipped, more precise than usual. The atmosphere was dense with unspoken grievances. Shaq kept his voice even. "We fix this together." Pointing fingers wastes time, but his words didn't stick the way they used to. Not here, not now. He stepped out of the meeting and paused in the break room, where two junior staffers suddenly went quiet upon seeing him. He caught only the end of a sentence. "Doesn't matter how much he donates if we can't access the damn files." That one stung, not because of the words, but because of the truth beneath them. The center had grown fast. Too fast, maybe. In his push to scale impact, Shaq had trusted systems more than people, trusted performance metrics over pulse checks. And now, with the systems gone, the people left behind were exposing fissures long ignored. By midweek, more troubling patterns surfaced. Rochelle, the same woman he'd promised to help during the crash, hadn't received a follow-up call. Not because no one wanted to help, but because her file was gone, and the staff was prioritizing easily recoverable cases first. Shaq's request to make sure no one slipped through had somehow turned into quiet triage, and Rochelle, being a longtime client with complex data, was left in limbo. June reported that the code responsible for the failure appeared to be disguised as a regular update, something that would have required high-level access. The discovery narrowed the list of potential insiders significantly, but no one dared name names. The fear wasn't just about guilt, it was about being wrong, and being remembered for pointing the wrong finger. Shaq walked the lower levels of the compound, late one night, hoping solitude might reveal clarity. The server room, usually a place of quiet confidence, now felt cold, sterile, uncertain. Rows of machines blinked in dull red, waiting for commands that wouldn't come. Outside, the hallway stretched into near darkness, only emergency lights offering brief illumination. He passed the training labs, where chairs sat half-turned from abandoned sessions. The vending machines blinked out of order, more out of symbolism than function. The whole building felt like a story paused mid-sentence. And then came the whispers, quiet, coded exchanges he picked up in elevators and copy rooms. Why's he always the face of everything? I heard someone from admin got paid to look the other way. They say the encryption matched something from the board's side. Maybe this was planned. Shaq heard it all. Said nothing. He didn't want to validate speculation by acknowledging it. But the whispers followed him. He began noticing small exclusions, teams forming their own Slack channels, memos he wasn't copied on, meetings that rescheduled without his notice. The unity he had so carefully fostered was unraveling in whispers and side glances. The most painful realization came from a review board planning document, left open on a conference room projector. Among the suggestions, rebrand leadership imagery to reflect wider diversity. It wasn't the suggestion itself that cut deep. It was the comment someone had left beside it. Too much Shaq, not enough team. For a man who had spent years removing his ego from the mission, that line hit like a quiet betrayal. He didn't respond. Not directly. Instead, he asked June to prepare a complete list of staff with root access permissions in the last 6 months. Not to accuse anyone, but to understand the landscape. To draw a map through the fog. When he met with Elwood that evening, the old janitor offered a simple piece of advice. You don't have to shout to make truth echo. You just gotta speak it in the quiet. Shaq nodded, the words settling like dust on polished wood. The next day he gathered the entire staff. Every department, every floor in the main atrium. No screens, no fancy projections, just him, standing beneath the skylight, sun dappling across his shoulders. I know you're angry. I know you're scared. So am I. We built this place on a promise, and promises are fragile things when systems fail. But systems don't make this place, we do. He didn't offer solutions. He didn't pretend things were under control. He only offered his presence, steady, open, accountable. Later that evening, Nova watched from the side hall as the staff dispersed, some shaken, others inspired. She didn't say much, but the look she gave her father, Elwood, as they walked out together spoke volume. In the absence of certainty, the halls whispered, but what they whispered about was more than blame. They whispered about pressure, about unseen layers of inequality, an ego that had been buried under functionality. When the tech failed, it wasn't just code that collapsed, it was trust. Shaq understood that now. The glitch had revealed more than a cyber breach. It had exposed a structural truth, that even in spaces built on good intentions, race, class and hierarchy found ways to fracture solidarity. And yet, in that truth was an opportunity, not to silence the whispers, but to listen more closely to what they were trying to say. Long after the lights dimmed, and most of the staff had cleared out, the hum of the building shifted into a low, patient rhythm. It was during this time, those hours that sat on the edge between day's end and the silence of night, that Elwood came alive, not in energy, but in presence. As the janitor of the Johnson O'Neill Community Tech Center, he was a figure that most didn't notice during the day. But once the noise faded, he was the rhythm in the walls, the breath between keys, the shuffle behind the silence. Elwood moved slowly, deliberately. Every sweep of his mop across the tiled floor had purpose. Every cartwheel squeaked like punctuation in a sentence only he could read. He wasn't nosy, and he wasn't invisible, not to himself. He simply watched. And in the years he'd walked those halls, he had seen far more than anyone realized. He knew who lingered in the break room, long after hours to avoid going home. He'd overheard the late-night strategy sessions, the cautious venting between supervisors, the hurried phone calls made with voices lowered to almost nothing. Most of it he never paid much mind to. It wasn't his place. But when the crash happened, and the center's calm gave way to tension and suspicion, he noticed how quickly the cracks widened, and where the cracks spread, the shadows deepened. It wasn't the servers Elwood watched. It was the people. He saw them walking faster, making fewer eye contacts, cutting through corridors like they were being chased by questions no one wanted to answer. Doors that once stayed open now clicked shut. Hallway conversations ceased the moment he turned a corner. And yet they never asked him anything, not even when he was there, mop in hand, not 10 feet away. To them, he was just Elwood the janitor. But that suited him just fine, because they never noticed who was watching. Nova, his daughter, had always been a quiet shadow in his world. Ever since she was young, she'd preferred to listen first, speak later. After school, she'd come to the center and wait for him in the modest staff room, tucked beside the storage closet. She'd bring her laptop, an old one Shaq had donated years back during a tech giveaway, and sit curled on the couch, fingers flying across the keyboard, eyes alert and scanning. What no one at the center knew was that Nova didn't just sit there playing games or doing homework. She listened, she observed, and most importantly, she Elwood had taught her the basics of digital literacy before most kids could spell algorithm. She picked up everything he gave her: network mapping, file structures, ethical hacking tutorials downloaded from public domains. She didn't speak about it much. She didn't need to. He saw it in the way she pieced together puzzles, the way she navigated code the same way he navigated those long corridors. Quietly, thoroughly, with intention. She didn't tell anyone she was often logged into the center's network on guest access, not to meddle, but to explore, to understand how things worked. Nova had a hunger for knowledge that burned quietly but intensely. She knew the architecture of the center's digital infrastructure better than most of the junior IT staff, not because she was told, but because she looked. That night, just 3 days after the crash, Nova sat with her screen aglow, fingers motionless, as she stared at the blinking error log she'd managed to pull from a buried cache directory. Elwood walked in, a warm sandwich in one hand, her favorite root beer in the other. "You digging again?" he asked gently. Nova didn't look up. "Dad, this isn't just a failure. This was a planned event. Someone buried a rewrite protocol under an internal system patch." Elwood furrowed his brow. Positive. I traced the pattern signature. It's disguised as a maintenance trigger but laced with reroute commands. Whoever did this wanted it to look like a routine update. But it isn't. They hid it deep. Elwood set the sandwich down beside her, watching her face. "Why you looking at this, baby? This ain't your storm to stand in." Nova finally looked at him, her eyes calm but burning. "Because no one else is looking in the right place." Elwood sighed, rubbed the bridge of his nose. He'd seen this fire in her before. Quiet and unyielding. It reminded him of himself, back when he'd applied for an engineering scholarship right out of high school. Before the denial letter came, before he was told to try a trade school instead, because numbers weren't for everyone. He never told Nova that story. He didn't want his bitterness to become her blueprint. Still, seeing her now so sharp, so certain, it pulled at something deep in him, a mix of pride and fear. "Don't let them pull you into their mess," he warned. "I'm not. I'm trying to clean it." Elwood chuckled softly, shaking his head. "That's my job." She grinned, the rare moment of lightness passing like wind through a cracked window. Then she returned to the screen. Elwood stepped out into the hallway, letting her work. He resumed his rounds, but his thoughts stayed with her. In the halls, he noticed the way the lights flickered a little longer than usual. When motion sensors kicked in, the security camera in the northeast stairwell had gone dark, a detail he'd logged in his head, though no one had reported it. There were too many small abnormalities piling up, too many silences masking too much noise. Later that night, Nova joined him for his final rounds. It had become a ritual for them. She carried the old clipboard he used to track maintenance tasks, though now it was more symbolic than necessary. As they passed by the operations room, she paused, glancing through the glass at the black monitors still blinking in error. "I wonder if they know how vulnerable they've become," she said softly. Elwood didn't answer. He just handed her the keys to the locked tech closet. "You think I should show this to Shaq?" she asked. Elwood considered it. Shaq was a good man, not perfect, but principled, and if anyone would listen, not just hear but listen, it would be him.
"You wait," Elwood said finally.
"You wait till you got everything lined up. And when you speak, make sure the truth don't just sound loud. Make sure it sounds clear." Nova nodded, storing the advice like code in her mind. In the coming days, she kept working silently, and Elwood, in his nightly path through shadowed halls, kept watching the people who never saw him. He saw how Shaq stood longer near the windows at dusk, worry framing his face. He saw June's eyes narrow as she scrolled through code she didn't recognize, her pride in conflict with fear. He noticed the subtle shift in the way staff avoided certain wings, or the way files on unsecured drives seemed to vanish overnight. The shadows of the building weren't empty. They carried echoes of oversight, of secrets, of people underestimated. And within those shadows moved a janitor who no one noticed and a daughter no one expected. What they would do with what they knew, that was still unfolding. But one thing was certain. The truth didn't need a title. It didn't care about status. It only needed to be seen. And in the quiet hours when no one else was looking, Elwood and Nova saw everything. The lights inside the control room flickered once, then steadied. The silence was dense, artificial, too clean, too hushed. Shaq stood over the main console, his hands planted wide on the metal desk, eyes locked on the streaming lines of corrupted code rolling across the primary monitor. It felt like staring into the unraveling core of something he had spent years building, something once strong and invincible now dissolving before his eyes. June stood beside him, her face pale, jaw clenched, hands trembling slightly as she scrolled through the log trail. "These aren't external signatures," she muttered. "This was done from inside. Look, someone bypassed the outer wall, rewrote root permissions under administrative shell access, and they knew what they were doing." Shaq's voice dropped to a near whisper. "That doesn't happen by accident." "No," June said, pulling up another buried file. "This was deliberate, calculated." The data confirmed what Shaq had been trying not to believe. The system failure wasn't just a technical glitch, it was a surgical strike. The encryption, the disguised code, the internal routing, it all pointed to one thing. Someone within the organization had sabotaged the very infrastructure designed to uplift the community. And they hadn't just wanted the system down, they wanted it erased. He took a deep breath, but it didn't steady him. The weight pressing on his chest remained. Staff voices rose beyond the glass windows of the control room. Word had spread. What started as murmurs had become arguments. People were choosing sides, drawing lines around fear and frustration. Shaq heard the fragments of panic through the glass. "We can't keep it open like this. What if there's more buried code? If we shut it down now, we'll lose everything. If we don't shut it down, we might make it worse." He turned away from the monitor and paced to the center of the room. His fists were tight at his sides, his expression unreadable but heavy. This wasn't just about corrupted code anymore. This was about the soul of what they had built. Two staff members, Denise from Program Logistics and Leonard from Finance, pushed their way into the room. Denise's voice was quick, clipped. "Shaq, I'm just going to say it. We need to take the system offline. Full shutdown. At least for 72 hours. We're risking data contamination every second it stays connected." Leonard stepped in, anxious. "Or we say it's a routine update. We don't have to announce sabotage. We can contain the story." Shaq looked at both of them, his eyes like steady beams of quiet fire. He didn't yell, he didn't need to. His stillness was louder than shouting. "We're not hiding this," he said, voice deep, certain. "And we're not shutting people out when they need us most." Denise blinked. "But, no," he said firmly. "We don't solve this by pretending it didn't happen. We solve it by owning it. We fix it in the light, not in shadows." The room went quiet. Leonard shifted uncomfortably. June looked at Shaq, gratitude flickering in her tired eyes, but also a trace of fear. Because even with the truth, even with integrity, the path ahead was steep, uncertain, and filled with landmines. Shaq stepped closer to the monitor. The scrolling code reflected in his eyes like the ruins of a fallen city. His breath caught in his throat. He wasn't just staring at failure. He was staring at betrayal. And what cut deeper than the sabotage itself was the knowledge that someone he had trusted, someone who had worked beside him, had done this. He dismissed the staff gently, asked for a moment alone. June hesitated but nodded, leading them out. When the door closed, Shaq dropped into the steel-backed chair and leaned forward, elbows on knees, hands covering his face. He stayed like that for a long time, unmoving, as the low whir of the server fans filled the silence. Then, quietly, he lowered his hands and stared at the blank section of the console in front of him. In this room, his sanctuary, his war room, the nucleus of everything, Shaq broke down, not loudly, not dramatically, but with a crushing stillness that settled into his bones. His shoulders trembled once, then again, his chest heaved, and tears welled up. Hot, unwanted, undeniable. He whispered to the empty room. I promised them this would be safe. All the families, all the kids, all the donors who believed, all the underprivileged communities who had finally seen hope, not as a fleeting light, but a consistent flame. They had trusted him, and now their data names, finances, futures was in limbo. He thought about Mayara, his daughter, about the day he brought her to the compound, showed her the coding labs, the mentorship wings. He'd told her this was what legacy meant. Not fame, not money, but building something that helped people stand tall. That didn't fade when the cameras stopped rolling. And now, the very foundation of that legacy trembled. His mind spiraled. Had he moved too fast? Trusted too quickly? Had his belief in collective goodwill made him blind to quiet resentment? The whispers he'd heard over the past week returned in waves. Accusations of ego, of overshadowing others, of being too much Shaq. He clenched his jaw. Was that what this was? A calculated effort to knock him down? To take the mission and twist it into something smaller, less radical, more convenient? The door behind him creaked open. Shaq didn't look up. He didn't need to. The footsteps were too light to be anyone else's. Nova. She stood at the threshold, silent, then gently approached, setting a folded printout on the console in front of him. He glanced down. It was a trace report. IP pings, encryption footprints, and buried scripts with admin fingerprints. Her signature was at the bottom, small, handwritten. I thought you should see this, she said quietly. Whoever did it masked their entry through a known credential. But I traced the pattern. It's not gone. Just disguised. Shaq looked at her, eyes red, face weary. You're the one who found this. Nova nodded. I've been watching since the first error. There's more buried under the primary root. I can help. If you want. He stared at her for a long moment, then nodded slowly. I want. She sat beside him, and together, they watched the screens flicker with new data lines, faint clues of the corruption. Her presence steadied him, not just because of what she knew, but because of what she represented, the future, the reason this fight mattered. Outside, the compound buzzed with unresolved tension. Inside, in the quiet heartbeat of the control room, a man once revered for his strength sat beside a teenage girl no one saw coming, both anchored by truth. Shaq wiped his eyes, stood up, and exhaled. He wasn't done. Not by a long shot. The main operations room buzzed like a hive disturbed, monitors flashing error messages, staff talking fast and loud, running between consoles and phones. The sheer panic of the crash had metastasized into chaos. Shaq paced among his team, his broad shoulders tense, voice steady but strained as he tried to coordinate recovery steps. June flipped through code layers, her brows furrowed in focused desperation. Around them, the urgency felt almost tactile, electricity crackling through the overheated environment. Amid this swirl of motion and vocal stress, Nova stood in the doorway, quiet as a shadow. She tucked a loose strand of hair behind her ear, her posture poised but calm, an island of stillness in a storm of adrenaline. None of the staff noticed her at first. They were too busy responding to alarms, checking error logs, debating whether to shut down modules to limit the damage. But when she stepped forward and cleared her throat, the room snapped to attention. Excuse me, she said, voice clear and unhurried. I think I found the trigger. The noise faded abruptly. Every head turned. Shaq's face softened with recognition. That was Nova's voice, unmistakable, because of its quiet confidence. He took a step forward, brushing past June, and motioned to her to continue. Silence settled, heavy and expectant. Nova walked between consoles, laptop open, and glowing in her hands. I've been watching the system since the crash, she began, her voice measured. Dad and I during the nights. You know, I traced the error logs back to an embedded protocol. It wasn't spontaneous. She tapped at her laptop. On screen, lines of code appeared, timestamps embedded mid-update cycle. She explained how a secondary script, designed to reroute data and wipe caches, was concealed within a charitable update meant to push new engagement features. The patterns matched an update pushed intentionally during off hours. Someone had cloaked the sabotage under a legitimate charity module. A hush fell, palpable and profound. Even June stared, wide-eyed, as Nova continued. The key signatures don't match any external distribution. The script executed with admin privileges. Whoever did this had root access, and they built it into the update, not through an outside attack. Questions started to come from every direction. Who? When? Why? Nova remained calm, her demeanor utterly composed. She drilled into the metadata of the hidden payload, matching IDs with commit logs. She flagged timestamps that aligned with a routine board review, and user credentials active only during internal deployments. The reveal was surgical, precise, electrifying. Shaq exhaled, eyes burning with both awe and relief. How long have you been tracking this? Since the first sync failure, Nova replied. I thought it was a glitch, but then I saw patterns. That's when I stayed later. I traced it back, and I found the script. I even flagged the credentials attached to it. Her gaze ran over the room, meeting skeptical glances with calm resolve. It wasn't an accident. The team leaned in. The atmosphere shifted immediately, from fear and buzzing uncertainty to focused investigation. Staff who were about to disconnect systems now huddled around Nova's code. Shaq guided her to the main console and connected her laptop. As she navigated the script's inner logic, the room hummed with renewed purpose. Hope hinged on knowledge. They watched as Nova ran line-by-line analysis. Look here, she pointed at a chunk of encoded data. These look like user tables being rerouted and replaced with null entries. It's not deletion, it's redirection, and the reroute path sends data into hidden partitions. June slumped into a chair, exhaling sharply. That's why we couldn't find the backups. They're subverted to void. Nova nodded. Exactly. Whoever did this wanted total erasure, no recovery. But there's a trace, and we can reverse engineer it. The staff scribbled notes, phones were silenced. This was something bigger, something deeper. Shaq watched them, heart pounding. In Nova's clarity, they found a path forward. In her confidence, a chance to salvage what had been lost. He felt tears prick his eyes, relief, gratitude, and the thrill of rescue swelling inside him. Nova, you found us a way back. She glanced at him. We rebuild, we reroute the reroute. We restore the tables, we bring them home. The control room shifted again. Teams reorganized. 8 engineers clustered around Nova, offering laptops, consoles, access credentials. Others updated the board via text and stream. The caretaker staff revised schedules to ensure no downtime. The energy turned collaborative, disciplined, hopeful. Shaq stayed at Nova's side. She was the catalyst. She didn't just reveal the sabotage, she offered redemption. And as the code began to reverse, lines executed to restore databases, re-enable permissions, and clear voided partitions, the room exhaled collectively. Monitors flickered to green, chimes signaled completion, and error logs reverted to clean status. When the final counter rolled to 0, and every station pinged healthy once more, a low cheer rose. Staff hugged, wiped brows, wiped tears. Shaq embraced Nova, lifting her into a hug that bridged fatherly pride and mission-critical triumph. Her hair brushed his chin. He whispered, "You saved all of us." She smiled, shutting her laptop. "We did." In that moment, in the hush that followed, they all understood something profound. Salvation hadn't come from outside experts or celebrity intervention. It came from a pair of shadows that no one had noticed but everyone needed. It came from quiet wisdom, buried beneath assumptions of lowly roles. It came from clarity and courage. Shaq turned to the team. "We owe her more than thanks. We owe her a system built so it can't happen again. We do this right, now." Staff nodded, galvanized. The rebuild was on, anchored by Nova's insight and Shaq's integrity. The panic had receded, replaced by something stronger. Purpose unified and recharged. As the operations room thrummed with renewed life, Shaq stood tall, Nova at his side. The darkness they faced hadn't just tested the system, it had tested their belief in one another. And while the saboteur hid behind code, the light had come from the doorway, quiet, understated, and brilliant. In their wake, the team found not only restoration but a lesson in resilience and humility. And above it all, Big Shaq and the janitor's daughter shone, unlikely heroes woven together by truth, emergence, and unwavering resolve. Long before Elwood wore the janitor's badge, before the nights of mopping floors and tightening screws in unseen corners, he had walked through the halls of a different building, a trade school on the west side of the city, where he used to stay late, poring over blueprints, staring at machine schematics long after his classmates had gone home. He used to believe his hands were meant to build more than they were allowed to touch. He'd always loved systems, how parts spoke to each other, how energy traveled in rhythm, how logic could shape something tangible. His instructors noticed it early. "You've got the mind for circuitry," one said, "but you're not what the firms are looking for," another added, quieter, years later, and that was the message that stuck. He tried to keep applying. He filled out every form, knocked on doors that never opened, and showed up to interviews that never called him back. Eventually, he stopped, not because he didn't believe in himself, but because the system did. Doors closed not because of his grades or skills, but because of something far older, more insidious, something spelled out in the look he got the moment he walked into rooms where nobody looked like him. So he took the job at the school maintenance department. 1 month turned into 10 years. He swept the halls of the very classrooms where he used to dream. He fixed the lights above computers he wasn't allowed to use anymore. He raised Nova in those same neighborhoods that taught him to expect less. Except he never let that lesson take root in her. From the time she could speak, Nova asked questions that made him pause. Questions not just about the world, but how it worked. Why does the toaster know when to pop the bread up? How come traffic lights are different lengths on different corners? He answered everything he could, and when he couldn't, he showed her how to find the answer. He saved up for a second-hand laptop, the same one she still carried, its keys worn down but resilient. He let her sit with him at night when he cleaned classrooms or fixed wiring, whispering his thoughts like prayers into her ear. Understand the wiring, and you'll understand the building. Understand the building, and you'll understand the system. You understand the system, and you can change it. Nova had absorbed it all, not with arrogance, but with curiosity and clarity. She had a light inside her that couldn't be dimmed, and when she uncovered the sabotage that nearly brought Shaq's foundation to its knees, Elwood had felt the collision of past and future in his chest, a crack in the wall that he'd spent decades learning to live behind. It was 2 days after the revelation, when Shaq asked him to meet in the rooftop garden, a space few knew about, hidden behind the solar panels that powered half the compound. Shaq was already there, leaning against the railing, gazing out over the city like he was trying to see beyond it. Elwood approached quietly, still unsure why he'd been called. Shaq turned, face calm but reflective, and motioned to the bench nearby. "Sit with me." Elwood sat, fingers folded in his lap, eyes scanning the sky. Shaq took a long breath. "You know, I used to think legacy was something you build. A name, a center, a foundation. But I'm starting to believe it's something you pass forward." Elwood nodded slightly. "Some of us never got the chance to build it. So we plant it in someone else. That's what I wanted to talk to you about," Shaq said, turning to him fully. "Nova, what she did, it wasn't just smart. It was brave. Quietly brilliant. She didn't just help us fix a system. She reminded us what this place is for." Elwood stayed silent. There was pride in his chest, but also something heavier, a caution that had grown over time. "I always knew she had something," he said at last. "Even when she was 5, she'd disassemble her toys just to see how they moved. I tried to give her what I couldn't finish for myself." Shaq leaned forward. "She didn't just get it from nowhere. She's a reflection. I was supposed to be an engineer," Elwood admitted, his voice low, as if the confession had waited years for release. "Had the grades, had the hours, didn't have the skin they wanted. So I built what I could with what was left. I swept up someone else's dream, and tried not to let the bitterness stick to her." Shaq's jaw tightened. He felt the weight of those words settle in his chest. "You gave her more than education, Elwood. You gave her vision, grit, and she's going to carry this place forward in a way I never could alone." The silence stretched between them, not awkward, but sacred. "I need your help," Shaq continued. "Not just with Nova, with this place. I want to rebuild the security framework, from scratch. But this time, not just with engineers and programmers. I want someone who's seen the system fail. Not just from behind a desk, but from the floor level. You know these walls better than anyone." Elwood looked at him, startled. "You want me in the design? I want your eyes on every layer. You've seen what we missed. You've known what others ignore, and I trust you." The offer landed heavy. Elwood didn't respond right away. He stared out over the city again. It was the kind of silence that held the echoes of old pain, missed chances, buried talent, and a life lived too long in quiet. He looked back at Shaq. "You sure the board's gonna be good with a janitor signing off on architecture?" "I don't care what they think," Shaq said. "I care about what works. And I know what you bring." Elwood exhaled, slow and deep. "Then let's build something that doesn't need backup plans." They sat together until the sun dipped behind the skyline, casting long shadows over the compound. It wasn't just two men on a bench. It was two timelines converging, one that had been denied its chance, and one that now burned brighter because of it. Later that evening, when Nova found her father sitting alone in the hallway, scribbling diagrams on a notepad, she asked him what he was doing. He smiled, something boyish and proud in the expression. Drawing some systems, he said. Got a few new ideas. Nova sat beside him, nodding like she'd been waiting for this moment, her whole life. Think they'll listen? She asked. They're already listening, he replied. Now we just make 'em hear. The conference room where Nova and Elwood convened late that night was bathed in soft fluorescent light, a quiet refuge amid the chaos outside. The digital whiteboard glowed with lines of decrypted text, encrypted identifiers stripped down into plain code names. Nova leaned in, her fingers flying over the laptop keyboard, tracing transaction logs and financial endpoints. Elwood watched, silent and steady, his mop abandoned in the shadowed hallway. The hum of the building at night was low, an echo of the conversation he was about to disrupt. Here, Nova said, highlighting a series of entries in the ledger that rewrote themselves to hidden partitions. These tags, they're tied to user IDs that aren't staff. They belong to board accounts with admin privileges. She clicked, rearranging columns to display email addresses and associated fund reconciliation entries. See that? Charitable funds rerouted through shell accounts. They flow out of our systems under the guise of operational costs. Elwood nodded, brow furrowed. He leaned closer, reading the names. What should have been confidential line items were exposing a trap, an elaborate theft in plain sight. That's Madison, and Blake, and Terrence. The faces flashed in his mind. Madison Hayes, the board vice chair, polished and media savvy. Blake Portman, the financial advisor whose sarcasm had cut deeper than he realized. Terrence Lowe, a founding member who'd fought alongside Shaq early on. Trusted names, esteemed, untouchable. Nova's tone was calm but deliberate when she spoke again. I cross-referenced the user IDs with deployment timestamps. See how their credentials activate late at night, synchronized with the crash timing. That's not happenstance. That's script execution scheduled to hit after hours, when the data flow would seem normal until it wasn't. Elwood swallowed. So they tanked the system on purpose to cover their tracks? Nova didn't blink. Exactly. They built it to look like sabotage by a hacker, but it was engineered from the inside, with intent to discredit leadership and get control for themselves. Silence spread across the room, thick enough to choke on. The weight of the betrayal nearly crushed them. Elwood closed his eyes. Images of those board members flash reflecting trust and camaraderie, handshakes, late-night strategy calls, speeches at the opening ceremony. How many times had he stood at the back cleaning tables after their meetings, surrounded by their applause? Now the same hands applauded while stealing. He reopened his eyes and stared at Nova. This goes all the way up. Yeah, she replied softly. And we're going to have to bring proof forward. They worked in quiet, methodical rhythm, organizing the data into a comprehensive dossier, transaction trails, encoded timestamps, shell account architecture, IP logs that tracked back to board member machines, every piece layered on the betrayal. Nova categorized deliberately, cross-referencing each name with internal audit steps they had rescued after restoring partial system access. Elwood scribbled notes and questions on a digital pad. He'd never thought he'd be compiling a case file like this, but necessity had thrust him here. By the time the clock struck 2, they had a complete picture. The sabotage wasn't financial alone. It was strategic. By freezing the system, they triggered internal panic and threatened to unravel Shaq's carefully cultivated public image. As chaos strangled the center, these board members planned to swoop in, offer solutions, and broker control to rebrand it into a private nonprofit under their direction. Essentially, co-opt Shaq's dream. Nova closed the laptop and looked intently at Elwood. We take this to Shaq tomorrow. He nodded. He needs to know exactly who did it, and how. His voice carried the quiet resolve of a man who'd lived long enough to understand how fragile trust can be. He won't go easy on them. Morning came heavy and anxious. Shaq had slept little. He'd been caught in confusion and sorrow since the sabotage revelation. When Nova and Elwood stepped into his office, they carried the dossier between them. Shaq's large silhouette softened when he saw them enter. Relief flickered across his features. Hope in action. They laid it all out. Transaction flows, timestamps, user logs. Shaq listened, expression tight, but attentive. He turned to the names: Madison, Blake, Terrence. Each whisper of betrayal resonated deeper than any system error could. He paused, voice low. They were with me since day one. Elwood spoke up, voice measured but unyielding. Big Shaq, this is more than sabotage. It's a takeover. They planned this to fracture your public trust, and then reconstruct the foundation under their authority. Shaq closed his eyes for a moment. He pictured the people this place served: families, children, volunteers who believed in redemption, not ruin. A fury surged, but he held it in, breathing deep. We do this with transparency, he said. No leak, no gossip, no quiet motions. We present it, evidence in hand, and let them explain. If they can't, we remove them. They spent the morning coordinating with June, the legal advisor, and the operations team. Shaq called an emergency board meeting, copy of the dossier in every hand. At 10 a.m., the boardroom filled, Madison and Blake exchanged practiced nods. Terrence stood silent, posture rigid behind the polished table. Shaq began calmly. You know why we're here. I've lost my faith in technology. But today, I'm laying out a different kind of faith, one in evidence, justice, and the people we serve. He walked through the data systematically. Nova supported with technical commentary. Elwood shared observations about nighttime activity, and June detailed the timeline of system reconstruction. The board members' faces grew pale. Shock, guilt, then defensiveness. Madison shifted in her seat, voice quivering as she claimed ignorance. Blake bluttered about complex financial triggers being misinterpreted. Terrence remained stoic, hands folded. Shaq paused, leaning forward. This isn't about a glitch. It's not an error. It's a choice. You chose to sink the foundation for personal gain. Marching through the evidence, he gave them room to respond. They faltered. Madison sputtered apologies. Blake stammered about unintended consequences. Terrence invoked tradition and his founding role. But the proof was relentless. There was no plausible deniability. In that room, trust shattered. At the moment, Shaq asked for their resignations, or else he would escalate to legal authorities. Something unexpected happened. The youngest board member, Elena Perez, a quiet voice who had been overlooked, stood. This isn't the way we build community, she said firmly. Yes, I didn't know. Yes, I didn't consent. But I believe in what Big Shaq built. I'm sorry I didn't dig deeper. Shaq watched her, considered. Then he said, we don't just restore systems, we restore trust. And it starts with ownership. Blake and Madison and Terrence stepped down. The atmosphere was heavy, but resolute. The binder of betrayal was taken from conference room. And in its place, Shaq offered a path forward, not just to preserve those exits, but to fortify the foundation so no betrayal could worm back in. Later that day, Nova and Elwood sat together on the rooftop bench, the city's hard angles softened by distance. Shaq joined them minutes later, their shared presence a silent affirmation. Shaq rested a hand on Elwood's shoulder. I couldn't have done this without both of you. Legally, system-wide, but more than that, morally. Elwood looked out over the skyline. We did it together. Nova leaned into her father. We stopped it. Shaq exhaled. We'll rebuild stronger, and we'll make sure this never happens again. In those moments, under the muted glow of late afternoon, they felt something renewed. The glitch had revealed more than corruption. It had revealed the layers beneath it. Ambition, resentment, exploitation, but it also revealed the resilience of unexpected heroes and the power of father to pass on his dream through his daughter to a giant willing to listen. The betrayal had rocked the foundation, but in the aftermath the foundation held, stronger, more grounded, and more human than ever before. The boardroom was designed to impress. Polished wood stretched from end to end, surrounded by chairs with backs too tall and leather too stiff. Framed portraits of donors and dignitaries lined the walls, their eyes fixed in static approval. The room held a quiet power, the kind built not from innovation, but from influence. Today, though, the mood was different. No one adjusted their ties or shuffled quarterly reports. Everyone sat still, waiting, breath caught somewhere between tension and denial. Shaquille O'Neal entered first, not towering as an athlete, but stepping in like a man who had carried the weight of a community on his back for too long. He wore no suit, just a gray button-down, rolled sleeves, and the quiet look of a man who was about to separate truth from reputation. Behind him came Elwood, shoulders squared, gaze steady, Then Nova, laptop under her arm, every step measured, eyes scanning each face, not in fear, but observation. She had seen the code. Now she was about to show them what had been buried in. Shaq took the seat at the head of the table. Elwood and Nova stood behind him, like pillars framing a man who didn't need to raise his voice to command the room. "Let's get started," Shaq said quietly. "No introductions, no agenda, just truth." He didn't begin with accusations. Instead, he projected Nova's screen to the central board display. The room dimmed slightly as the white glow of her desktop illuminated the darkness. One by one, she walked them through the story, not in dramatic rhetoric but in code. Log times, ledger transactions, and encrypted command strings. "This entry here," she said, clicking on a batch of obfuscated code, "looks like a standard charity module update. But embedded within it is a redirect command. It rerouted $1.3 million in donor contributions over 4 months to accounts disguised as third-party tech vendors." She expanded the metadata. "These account holders match IP login times, server fingerprints, and administrative credentials used by 3 board members during off-site sessions." The room fell into breathless quiet. Across from her, Madison's fingers twitched. Blake shifted in his chair. Terrence lowered his gaze. Shaq didn't flinch. He waited as Nova pulled up visual overlays, mapping transactions to calendar dates and board meeting records. The corruption didn't just sit in numbers. It was sewn into patterns, last-minute vote shifts, phantom budget approvals, emergency proposals passed under false pretenses. Elwood spoke next, his voice even but powerful. This wasn't just mismanagement. It was orchestration, and it nearly destroyed what this foundation was built to protect. Shaq rose from his seat slowly. "You didn't just betray me. You betrayed every family who walks through those doors, hoping for a second chance. You used my name, my vision to construct a tunnel for your greed." Blake opened his mouth, but Shaq held up his hand. "No, you'll speak when this is done." He turned back to Nova, who pulled up final signatures timestamps that aligned perfectly with the system crash, and a scheduled off-site retreat where Terrence had quietly pushed a proposal to restructure digital oversight under external auditors. "I wonder," Shaq said, his voice iron-wrapped silk, "how many of you thought I wouldn't notice? Or maybe, how many of you believed I was too focused on people to watch the numbers? You're right. I was focused on people, but that doesn't mean I stopped watching." Madison's voice cracked as she finally spoke. I didn't know how far it would go. I was told it was a minor redirect, a tech expense." Shaq stared at her. "You signed 5 authorizations for shell vendors that never existed." Terrence stood, pushing his chair back. "It was a mistake." "No," Shaq replied, "it was a strategy." He paused, letting the silence hang. "I'm not calling for a vote. This is not a court. This is a reckoning." He placed a printed folder on the table. Copies of every document, signature and timeline, Nova and Elwood had compiled. "I'm giving you 2 options. Resign. Today, with written statements of accountability, or I take this entire file public and forward it to every grant committee, donor and press outlet who's ever supported us." No one moved at first. Then slowly, Madison removed her badge and laid it on the table. "I'm sorry," she said, voice barely a whisper. Blake followed, jaw clenched. Terrence paused longest before leaving his resignation beside the others. Shaq looked down at them, these former giants of the room, now reduced to names in a ledger of betrayal. "Redemption is earned," he said. "But not here, not now." He turned to the rest of the board, those uninvolved but shaken. "We rebuild from here. Not just tech, not just programs, but integrity. And that begins with acknowledging what we let slide." Elena Perez, the youngest member, cleared her throat. "We failed you, Shaq. Not because we did wrong, but because we didn't look hard enough at those who did." Shaq nodded. "Then we moved forward, together." After the meeting, as the boardroom emptied, Nova was approached by Dr. Everett, the university liaison. He extended a folder, crisp and formal. "Nova, your analysis, your clarity. It's remarkable. Our Department of Cybersecurity has authorized a full scholarship, should you choose to accept." Nova looked at the offer for a long moment, then at her father, and then back at Shaq. Her voice was calm. "Thank you. But my place is here right now. There's still a system to rebuild." Dr. Everett nodded, respecting her decision. Elwood walked up beside her, pride etched deep into every line of his face. "You sure, baby girl?" She smiled. "This place still needs us." Shaq placed a hand on her shoulder. She just chose service over status. That's the foundation I always dreamed of. The sun was setting when the last chair was pushed in and the boardroom doors finally closed. The weight of corruption had been lifted, not erased, but confronted, and in its place, something else had been restored. Not just trust, but truth. The reckoning wasn't loud. It wasn't a fight. It was something stronger, a quiet strength rooted in clarity and integrity. And in that stillness, the Johnson O'Neill Foundation didn't just survive, it turned a corner, toward healing, toward rebirth, toward something unshakable. Justice had walked in not with noise but with purpose, and it had left with the room changed forever. The sun fell through the tall glass windows of the Johnson O'Neill Community Tech Center like it was drawn there on purpose. Where once the light exposed cracks in confidence and confusion in leadership, it now draped itself across polished floors and whiteboards covered with blueprints of the future. The hum of the servers had returned, not frantic or faltering, but calm, sure. The system once hollowed and hacked, now pulsed with renewal. Shaquille O'Neal stood at the edge of the hallway outside the main operations room, arms folded loosely across his chest, watching the life inside the building move with a rhythm he recognized and had missed. It had been 6 weeks since the boardroom reckoning, 6 weeks since truth had been laid bare, and corruption named out loud. And in those 6 weeks, this place hadn't just recovered. It had evolved. Nova sat at the center terminal, surrounded by a circle of young volunteers and interns, all eyes on her as she explained a new protocol she'd developed. A digital ethics layer designed to audit every transaction, every line of code for integrity and transparency. She didn't speak with authority. She spoke with clarity, the kind that drew people in rather than forcing them to listen. Her fingers moved with confidence across the keyboard, pulling up simulation logs, redirect chains and architecture maps of the new internal logic. This is where trust lives, she explained, pointing to a visual of the system's logic tree. Right here, this is the chain that notifies every admin of real-time financial actions. No more shadows. No more single points of failure. Every decision leaves a trail. One of the students raised his hand. Who audits the auditors? Nova smiled. We do. All of us. The structure is built on mutual verification. It means no one's above the code. From the hallway, Shaq watched her with pride so big it ached. Not because she had saved the system, but because she had chosen to stay when she could have gone anywhere. Offers had poured in after her testimony. Universities, think tanks, even a consulting firm, but Nova had quietly turned each one down. I'm not done building yet, she'd told Shaq. And now, here she was. Not just a prodigy, but a leader. Not just his teammate, but the soul of the rebuild. He turned to the adjacent room where Elwood stood at the front of a different kind of classroom. Half a dozen teenagers sat with tablets and soldering kits, spread across a long table. Elwood held up a motherboard. Now you might think this is just metal and plastic, but this thing's like a city. Each wire, each gate, it's a highway. Your job ain't just to build it, it's to understand how it breathes. The students leaned in. One boy, no older than 14, raised his hand. Mr. Elwood, why didn't you become an engineer? Elwood chuckled softly. Because sometimes the roadblocks ain't on the street, they're in the system. But that don't mean you stop driving. You just build your own way through. He met the boy's eyes with a steady smile. And now I get to help you do that without detours. This was Elwood's new role. Mentor, guide, builder of not just machines, but minds. After the scandal, Shaq had offered him a permanent seat at the design table. Elwood had hesitated, only until Nova looked at him and said, "You've already been leading. Might as well make it official." Now his fingerprints were on everything from the building's energy system to the internal monitoring network. He worked late some nights, but not out of obligation, because he finally got to shape what he once cleaned. Back in the atrium, Shaq made his way to the front desk, where a young woman was helping an elderly visitor sign in for a community tech session. The woman looked up, smiled, and handed the visitor a device. "Welcome to the reboot," she said cheerfully. Shaq chuckled. That phrase had started circulating the center, like a joke and a truth. The reboot. But it wasn't just the system, it was the culture. The staff meetings were now part feedback circle, part strategy hub. Internal audits were collaborative instead of combative. Even the server room had been renamed the core, not just a tech space, but a symbolic center of transparency and purpose. He walked slowly toward the community lounge, where a screen displayed real-time data of center performance. How many people had completed training modules this week? How many new users had registered? How many families had received support? But the numbers weren't just data, they were stories, and everyone here treated them that way. Shaq took a seat near the coffee bar and pulled out a tablet. A message was waiting from Elena Perez, now the acting board chair. Her note was short but powerful. The difference isn't just that we're better, it's that we're awake. Thank you. He stared at the message for a moment, letting it settle. Then he scrolled to the daily summary. A program Nova had built automatically flagged any anomalies. None today. Everything clean. Everything smooth. Outside, children ran through the community garden, on the East Wing lawn. Parents sat in shade structures nearby, watching them while staff prepped for the weekend coding boot camp. The compound, once a battlefield of panic and betrayal, had become whole again. A soft voice interrupted his thoughts. "You look like someone who's finally breathing right," Elwood said, easing into the chair across from him. Shaq laughed. "I forgot what that felt like." Elwood nodded, glancing toward the windows. "The system's clean now, but the people, that's what makes it run right. Funny how we almost lost it," Shaq said. "Sometimes you gotta break a thing to see where it's hollow," Elwood replied. Shaq leaned back, looking up at the skylight above. This place, it wasn't just saved, it was changed. For good. And for the better, Elwood added. Later that afternoon, Nova joined them with 2 interns in tow, eager to show Shaq a new access visualization interface. They sat together at the console, Nova explaining the layered visibility model, how admins could see systems without editing them, how all actions required dual authorization. Shaq listened, nodding. Checks and balances. Just like we wanted. No, Nova said. Better. Because now it doesn't depend on belief in people. It depends on everyone believing in accountability. He stared at her, this young woman who had walked into the operations room when it was on fire, and laid down a blueprint for how to put it out. "You know," he said quietly, "you didn't just fix our system. You defined it." Nova smiled. Systems should serve people, not the other way around. The sun outside began to dip, gold soaking into the walls like a benediction. The building breathed easily. The staff moved through its corridors with pride instead of doubt. The system, once shattered, now stood as a testament not just to resilience, but to deliberate, community-driven renewal. And for the first time in a long time, Shaquille O'Neal didn't walk with the weight of expectation. He walked with clarity, with gratitude, with the steady step of a man who'd seen the worst of what could go wrong, and helped shape what could go right. The system didn't just run now. It healed. Think deeper than the glitch. Question louder than the silence. In a world where systems fail and trust is fragile, it's the unseen voices that shift everything. Stay with the stories that challenge power, honor truth, and rebuild from the inside out. Because what comes next, you won't want to miss.